I will call this meeting to order. Today is the 8th of March, and this is a special meeting of the Board of Directors, White Basin Water District, Metropolitan District Representatives Caucus. And so with that, I will determine if there's a quorum. If our staff could please do a roll call.
Absolutely, President Houston. So we'll start with Director here, Director Gray. Director Gray. Director Alvarez. Director Williams. And President Houston.
Here.
Okay, so we have
2 out of 3 so far, but if you all could continue to confirm with Director Gray Technologies here. In the meantime, do we have any public comment?
we do not have any public comments here in the room. I'm sorry. Okay, we have Director Williams here, present.
Were you waiting for me?
Yes.
Never wait for me.
Oh, we actually already did a roll call.
I just wanted to have 5 of us here.
All right,
Never
well,
wait.
Okay, so Director Williams has just arrived. He's here. And we're.
Call me out. Just call me out.
Director.
Here.
There's Director Gray.
Director
Wonderful.
Gray is here.
Congratulations.
Thank
Director
you,
Gray.
thank you so much. Thank you.
yes, yeah, I think it's nice to acknowledge, perhaps if it pleases the president.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we're happy to congratulate our Director Gloria Gray in her victory election for Inglewood City Council. Congratulations, Director Gray.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Appreciate it. Thank you again.
Okay, so with that, moving on to public comments. We have no public comments here in the room. So I'll turn my attention to the online platform to recognize any member of the audience who'd like to make a public comment. It appears that we do have my good friend and colleague Craig Cadwallader who would like to make a public comment. So let's go ahead and put 3 minutes on the clock. And Mr. Cadwallader, please begin your remarks.
Good afternoon, board and staff. My name is Craig Cadwallader, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Surfrider Foundation South Bay chapter. And I simply wanted to add my congratulations to Director Gray as well. That's all I wanted to do. And thank you for allowing me to comment.
Okay, well, thank you for making that comment. And I'm sure on behalf of Director Gray, she really appreciates your acknowledgement and your congratulations. Thank you for sharing that. So with that, do we have any additional members of the online platform who would like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing none, I just want to thank our guests who are here with us in person today. And also Kate Nutting from Golden State Water, who is also with us here today. And I hope to encourage our members who are online to perhaps considering joining us here in person next month. We would certainly be glad to host you with lunch and good conversation. All right, so with that, back to you, President Houston.
Great, thank you very much. And just will say before we move into the next item, I did also want to mention it is International Women's Day today. So that is obviously where we honor the contributions of women all around the world to every facet of life. And so what a great day to acknowledge that, as well as the fact that, yes, congratulations are in order for our colleague, Director Gloria Gray, who looks to be the council member elect from the city of Inglewood. So how fitting, quite frankly, again, International Women's Day. And so with that, I want to say thank you for everyone who's here and the ones that are watching from afar. And we'll move forward to item 4, our discussion items. And so, Greg, if you could lead us in item 4A, please.
And I'll quickly hand it over to Dimitri Polizos, our Manager of Water Resources with Metropolitan Water District, to present on item 4A, which is the update on water supply conditions. So Dimitri, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Let's see if I get this. It's working. Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here in person. I must admit, I'm a little out of practice presenting in front of a live audience. It's been a while, so thank you for giving me the practice here today. But and for the first time in a long time, I'm able to provide some good news with respect to our water supply. So I'm just going to jump right into it here. So we have been hit with multiple storms. The one you see on the screen here is the last one that we saw come through that brought some crazy weather here in Southern California and actually throughout the state. It wasn't actually an atmospheric river, but it certainly brought a lot of more snow and some sites we don't normally see. We do actually see some snow in the mountaintops here, but not as much as we saw this year and as low as we just experienced. We even got snow at the happiest place on earth, which made a few people not so happy. They were trying to escape snow from their home state, but it is what it is. And then closer to home for me, my happiest place on earth, we also got some snow here at sea level. So pretty fantastic things to see after experiencing 3 very, very dry years. So what does this mean with respect to metropolitan water supply? Well, we're going to be able to do something this year that we have not been able to do in 3 years, and that is actually put water into storage. So we're anticipating having a fair amount of water. And as we see our supplies continue to increase and our demands to continue to decrease, because that has been the trend, we're going to be able to store even more water than what this graphic is about to show you here. So let me just click right through. Right now, with a 35% allocation from the State Water Project, which is reflected in this graphic, and our Colorado River supplies, this is prior to taking any storage. So storage is not part of this graphic here. This is just our used supplies from this current year. We have 1.56 million acre feet of estimated supplies. Compare that with our current trend demand, which is 1.44. Again, for the first time in a long time, our demands are lower than our supply. And so right now we're estimating about 120,000 acre feet that we're going to be able to put into storage. That number is going to increase. I know that because the State Water Project allocation is going to increase. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. But as of right now, we're looking at managing 120,000 acre feet. And we are prioritizing our storage facilities and programs that are accessible to the State Water Project. Dependent areas, as you know, that area has been hit pretty hard given the back-to-back 5% allocations that we received from the state. So that has put a drain on our storage programs that are accessible. So we're looking to make things up there and start storing available supplies there first before we spread that to other parts of our the region. All right, so a little bit on the water supply or the conditions up north. This is the snowpack graphic for the Northern Sierras. So this gives us a good sense of our supplies coming from the State Water Project. And as you can see here, 145% of normal, well above normal. And that's comparing to the April 1st date. That's the typical peak of the season. So we're about a month away from that, but we're already 145% of normal. And that trend is going to continue to increase with the storms that are coming. Albeit they're a little bit warmer storms, so we're going to start seeing some of that snow melt or snowfall at the lower elevations starting to melt. But at the higher elevations, we're going to still accumulate some snow out of the systems that are coming in the coming days and weeks. See here, so as you move down the state, it actually becomes even more remarkable. The Sierra Nevada snowpack, the central Sierra is actually at 184%, so it's doing far better than the Northern Sierra is. And we look at the central Sierra because it's a good indication of the flows on the San Joaquin River. And why is that important? Well, if you see higher flows on the San Joaquin, that helps the Department of Water Resources satisfy the requirements that they have in the Delta. And that allows them to continue to export at higher levels. That's typically how that all works. And so when you have a good, healthy snowpack sitting above the reservoirs that are, and this is part of the Central Valley Project, but we're anticipating releases from those reservoirs. A lot of that water will end up in the San Joaquin. And again, that helps flush the delta and help the department satisfy their requirements. And that translates then to potentially increased exports and increased supplies for the State Water Project. As we move further south, pretty remarkable here, more than twice the amount of snow that we typically would expect at the peak of the season for the Southern Sierra. So we like to look at this because that gives us a sense of supplies available for LADWP and their aqueduct. And so, of course, the healthier supplies that they have, that's less demand on Metropolitan. And that is already, we're starting to reflect that in our demand numbers. And not just from the LA Aqueduct, but throughout the region, local supplies are much healthier, and we're expecting to see those increase, which again reduces demands on Metropolitan. So we're in a year now where we're seeing supplies continue to increase and demands are going to slightly increase more. Again, that bodes well for our abilities or opportunities to store water into our storage. Right now, again, I mentioned about 120,000 acre feet. That could go as high as about 1 million acre feet of available storage. We've seen that before back in 2017. Depending on how high this allocation on the state goes, we could have a fair amount of water to store. And just rest assured, we have to put it, and we're going to try to maximize every drop of it. So just a quick look at some of the key reservoirs around the state with respect to the State Water Project. This is Oroville, and you can see how we've increased storage levels by over 1.5 million acre feet since mid or late December. And a lot of the current allocation that the state has provided, they're currently at a 35% allocation. It really reflects what is in Oroville right now. And that's what you're seeing. A lot of the snowpack and the expected runoff from the snowpack is not quite reflected in the allocation, but we're going to start seeing that. And that's why I'm anticipating that allocation to increase. We'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide. But the other reservoir we like to look at, I keep forgetting about this guy. Here's a satellite image, and unlike the Lake Mead, both reservoirs have a bathtub ring, but unlike Lake Mead, we can get rid of the one in Oroville within a season. It has happened before, and it's happening this year. So this is looking at Oroville since November of last year, and you can already see how that ring is disappearing. And in fact, going into the next couple of weeks here, and we anticipate them releasing water from Oroville through the spillway. That's in anticipation of all the runoff they're going to get from the snowpack, and also the next couple of storms that are going to come in, which again are going to be slightly on the warmer side. So you're going to see that lower elevation snow starting to melt, and we're going to see that enter into the Oroville, and they're getting close to their flood control levels in Oroville. So they're going to start releasing some of that water. So here's another look at the other reservoir here in St. Louis. Again, also seeing great spikes. So I like to call this proof in the pudding here. It's one thing to have Mother Nature do its thing and we have a nice snowpack sitting up above Oroville, but getting it through the delta is the challenge. And what this is showing you is that during these storms, we were able to do just that. And a lot of that had to do with the higher flows, again, on the San Joaquin, which allowed the department to satisfy a lot of their requirements. So you're seeing that reflected here. And just to give you a sense of how dynamic and how things change so quickly, we started this year with the department providing human health and safety water, kind of the bare minimum amount of water folks needed. That no longer is being offered because obviously with the 35% allocation, that exceeds, and certainly the case for Metropolitan, exceeds our human health and safety need. Now we're talking about the department offering what they call Article 21 supplies, and that's surplus water. That's when 3 conditions are met. 1, the department is satisfying all of their contractors' needs. 2, there's excess capacity at the export pumps to move additional water. And 3, San Luis is running out of space. So all of those conditions are expected to happen in the coming weeks. So Article 21, or these surplus supplies, will be made available. Metropolitan is working with the department and coordinating with them to maximize our take of that water as well, so that we can add to, and that adds to our State Water Project allocation. So we'll see how that develops over the coming weeks. Let's talk a little bit about the state, where we think the State Water Project allocation might be heading. And to do that, we like to use this 8-station graphic. This is the precipitation graphic for Northern California. And this again is an indication of the water supply for the State Water Project. What you're seeing here, the blue shaded region is essentially what we've seen in the past as far as the driest and the wettest conditions. And so you have your range from 17 inches all the way up to 94.7 inches. That record, that 94.7 was made back in 2017. Currently, we're at 45.1 inches. That's what you're seeing there in that yellow line. We put last year on there so you can see kind of how we compare with last year. Keep in mind, this is more of a indication of rainfall, this graphic. And these storms that we've seen to date have been very, very cold storms. So we've seen a very healthy snowpack out of it, less the rainfall. So that's why you see 120% of average for the rainfall, but and 140, 150% of average on the snowpack. But if you project out where we are today, 45.1 inches that we've already received, out to the end of the year, and looked at all the historical years on 100 data points, and you look at normal conditions from this date forward, that's looking at, I gotta write this down so I knew I was going to forget, roughly another 13.5 inches of rain. And if we saw that, we would end up we'll end up roughly at 58.6 inches. Now, through the years, Metropolitan has developed a tool that correlates precipitation with runoff on the Sacramento River. And what we're showing is if with a 58.6 inches of precip, that translates to about 20 million acre feet of runoff. So if you look at the department's latest study, 20 million acre feet of runoff translates to about a 74% to an 80% state water project allocation. So that's just to repeat that. If we have normal conditions from this point forward, which is another 13 or so inches of rain, we could expect, based on the department's latest study, an allocation that could be as high as 80%. Now, if you don't believe normal conditions will occur between now and the end of the year, I'll give you a couple more options. I'll give you a dry and a wet condition here. And so this band looks at the driest conditions from this point forward, and the top edge looks at the wettest. And if we, I'll just click through here. On the dry side, so if we get a mere 8 or so more inches between now and the end of the year, that translates to 17 million acre feet of runoff. And per the department's latest study, that gets us to a 53% allocation. So I think that's your minimum allocation for this year. And then on the top side, if it is wet conditions continue for the end of the year, something I haven't seen since the day I started or the year I started back in 2006, 100% state water project allocation is in the realm of possibility. We haven't even seen that on their studies until this year. So that's pretty significant. So that gives you a sense of the range that we might kind of see going forward. The department has been slow to increase for a couple of reasons. I think primarily they didn't want to have a repeat of last year where they increased the allocation. The runoff did not materialize from the snowpack, and they had to start decreasing the allocation. That's not going to happen this year. I'll be emphatic about that because a couple of things. Conditions are very much different. Going into this year, the soil moisture is much better than it was going into last year. And then also the temperatures. This has just been a colder year. We're not seeing those warmer, hotter temperatures that compete and take or a demand on that runoff from the snowpack. So I do expect to see a healthy runoff. I do expect to see the allocation to increase. Stay tuned as to how high the next study from the department comes out in a few weeks, closer to the end of the month. So we'll have a better sense of where they believe the allocation
Put my hand up on it, baby.
to increase. One more note here, there's plenty more rain in the forecast, not just here in in California, but also in the upper Colorado River Basin. So there are 3 more, last I heard, 3 more atmospheric rivers that are expected in the next 2 weeks. So that's why you're seeing all that red and yellows there. That's looking at pretty high levels of precip for California, but also a fair amount for the upper Colorado River Basin. And speaking of the upper Colorado River Basin, not a bad year there either. 120% of that April 1st average. So well above average conditions, although that system is much larger than the system we have here in California. The infrastructure is much larger. You have much larger reservoirs, so it takes more than one good year to rebound. So you're not going to see a Lake Mead bounce back like we're seeing Oroville doing. Bill Hazenkamp's here to talk a little bit more about that later, I'm sure. But needless to say, ongoing challenges on the Colorado River. There are a lot of unknowns right now. Even with the things that we do know and where the lake levels are, with the existing rules in place, we could see impacts to metropolitan supply as early as next year. But there's a lot of uncertainty with new rules that might be put in place that might further impact us. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. So we are doing well on the one side of our system for this year, but we know that we have some challenges that we're facing on the Colorado River. And keep in mind, we have no idea how the State Water Project is going to be next year. Very dynamic. It could switch, can turn on a dime just as quickly as it got wet. It could quickly revert back. So final notes here. Yep, good news on the state side. But I always like to leave or finish off with this message. We are looking at what we call surplus conditions on the State Water Project this year. That is true, but we can't keep our eye off of our need to continue to conserve, because it's what we do now during these opportunities when it's wet, to be able to store as much water as we can, to be able to get through the inevitable next dry period that we will have. I can't tell you when it's going to happen, but it definitely will happen. So with that, I'll finish off there and have to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dimitri, very much. And I see Director Deere has his hand up. So go ahead, Director Deere.
This term, atmospheric. I think, I don't remember 20, 30 years ago, that term being used. Now it's all over the paper and the news and everywhere. When did it get started, and by whom and how?
Yeah. So I think every season they come up with new catchphrases or words, but you might be familiar with Pineapple Express. Remember that term? That was out before I remember hearing the atmospheric rivers. I think as the science gets better and they better understand how the weather systems work, they are able to characterize different types of weather systems. A Pineapple Express is a type of atmospheric river. I'm not sure when that all started, but it is something that not only are they referring to these storms, but they now have a system that categorizes them, just like hurricanes. So, and so we've actually been hit, and we've had 9 so far this year, and a majority of those were significant or higher atmospheric rivers. I think the scale is 1 through 5 that they've landed on now. But to answer your question, I don't know exactly when it came out, but it's not a new phenomenon. We've seen these happen before, but I think it's new that we're able to characterize and identify them as such.
Other questions, Director?
Just
Williams.
quickly, where does El Nino fit in this?
So that's a great question. Right now, so we were in an El Nino condition, and that typically means drier conditions here for Southern California. But near the end of December, we actually moved, and they were projecting that we would move off of an it was a La Nina, I'm sorry. It was a La Nina. We did not have an El Nino this year. It was a La Nina. We shifted to a neutral position, somewhere between a La Nina and an El Nino. But even that, you really don't know what you're going to get. I remember, in fact, presenting here during the El Nino years, and everyone thought that would be wet conditions in certain parts of the state. But it turns out, if you look at the record, even in El Nino years, we've had really, really wet years and really, really dry years. So it's more information to provide you, maybe kind of what to expect. But it's here in the West Coast, it's very difficult to pinpoint what the impacts are going to be, especially in Northern California. It's really a hit and miss. Here in Southern California, La Nina, El Nino, you might get some direction from that, but it's not 100% or a guarantee. So science needs to keep on developing and improving before we can kind of predict and call these things out in certain ways.
Climate change increases. Who knows?
I might change it all more, yeah. But one thing for certain, and we're already seeing climate changes, we're seeing much more big swings back and forth and more extreme conditions. More rainfall, less snowpack, and all coming in one time or a condensed amount of time. And so that's the challenge for water managers going forward is how do you manage that?
Thank you on that one. And I did see Director LaFave's hand is raised. So Director LaFave, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've been having trouble figuring out how to get my microphone to work. Dimitri, do we expect the demand to stay in that range? That's pretty low.
It is low, and I actually expect it to drop a little further. As we learn more about how these storms are going to impact the region's local supply production and also LADWP's LA Aqueduct, we've started to reflect that. But as we work with them as the year progresses, we're going to have a better look at or estimate of what that demand is going to be. But I do expect it to drop further.
How about next year? Same kind of range?
Yeah, so that's harder to predict, but I can say my understanding is the supplies on the LA Aqueduct will be there for them this year and also going into next calendar year. So I think we're going to see some suppressed demands going forward. And the region prior to this, with all the conservation, a lot of that is still in place and should be in place. And you're seeing some demand reductions there as well. So it's a combination of all these things. It speaks well for our ability to put water into storage, but of course, revenues to drop off significantly.
Sure sounds good. Thanks, Dimitri.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions? General Manager Greg Reed.
And thank you for the presentation, Dimitri. Really fantastic. Do you also see any challenges with moving surplus water into storage from a kind of a runoff kind of perspective?
I think we're in pretty good shape right now. We're getting out ahead of this. We anticipated this happening. We're working with the department on seeing the quantity that would be available to us. We worked with our partners that, our banking program partners. We've worked with the department to maximize our puts into carryover into, that's our water we are able to put into San Luis Reservoir. Also refilling the flex storage that we have. So that's water that we have access to in Castaic and Lake Paris. So we have a lot of options and a lot of holes to fill. And of course we have DDL. So we are in anticipation to this, we're kind of getting out ahead of it so that we are able to maximize as much of it as possible. And again, we're prioritizing the storage that is accessible to the state water project first. And with the 35% allocation, we're able to move quite a fair amount of water into those programs. But again, that allocation is going to increase. So we're going to have a lot of water. But again, we have a lot of places to put it, and being out ahead of it, we're going to be able to succeed.
So not much risk of spill or maybe even damage due to flooding or anything like that?
Well, there may be, depending on where you are and what part of the system. I think here locally, we'd have to talk with the local agencies and see what their situations are with respect to local flooding and damage there. But with respect to the state water project, they are trying to manage the water that they anticipate coming, and that's why they're doing some early releases from Oroville so that it's not a fast and furious. It's more of a moderate or tempered, over time. So all those things those are great questions, and those are the things that are weighing heavy. I've always said this, wet years are harder to manage than dry years. You don't have many options in the dry years, but in the wet years, there's a lot of things you need to think about. It's not just about capturing all the water, but protecting, people, lives.
That's right. Thank you for that.
Thank you. EJ Caldwell. Go ahead.
This might be slightly off topic, but when you talked about the LA Aqueduct and then you talked about conservation, is MET currently analyzing the impacts of Measure W? I think that was passed in 2018. I think they started collecting in 2019. And I think in the early part of 2020 was the first list of projects that were being funded for the regional funding. And then I know that each municipality is getting their 50% share. So they're constantly now investing. Not all of the cities within LA County will have projects that produce quote unquote water supply. And I've seen that actually in the regional projects where they're promoting it as a water supply project and it's kind of questionable. But is Met tracking that, or have you seen any impacts of those investments as far as water demand?
Well, I may need to call a friend on that question because I don't know the answer to it. But I think Brad's on, but I'm not sure if he is aware if we're tracking or where we're at, but.
Uh, Hi, EJ. Thanks for that question. You've probably seen a report that some of the Measure W projects, the progress is rather slow. We do follow those projects, but we don't have an estimate of the improvements from them at this time.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. I see Director Williams has a question.
Yeah, comment, question. When I began my career, when I was a little kid, it was a different issue concerning water. When I became a design engineer in storm drain design, our mission was to do whatever we could to keep the water and get it out of here. So it was, and the reason for that, I was told that when we don't want our homeowners and property owners to be sitting in their living room with water up to their ankles. So your job is to get all the storm water out of here. And we did a real good job. And that's why there's the runoff that comes now is not going to affect property because it fits real well into the storm drains and it gets out of here real quick. So I noticed that but our area is very flat. So when there's not much rainfall, it seems like it takes forever for the water to leave the area. But when it's like this, we've had rainfall. If you stand close to a storm drain, you're in trouble. It'll suck you right in there. But then as soon as it stops raining, it goes away. So in our Measure W, how does Measure W fit in there?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Well, West Basin, we do represent two of the watershed area steering committees looking at regional projects. Each of the municipalities obviously gets significant funding. They typically have a long list of projects, and I'll be honest, a lot of those projects have what I would call crossover appeal. So you have a lot of parks and recreation. So it's kind of looking at that. How do you keep water on open space rather than having it run off into the streets and into the storm drains? So a lot of the projects are related to that. You see large cisterns and such like that, and open space projects that would actually provide opportunities to get that runoff onto the municipal properties. So I think it's a mixture of how cities are utilizing that and then how you're seeing the regional aspects of those funding projects. But as Brad said, cities have very limited staff, especially a lot of ours that are much smaller. And so spending that money is actually very difficult. And you're starting to see that backlog of projects. So it could take some time to get those projects moving forward. But a lot of it, storm drain covers and stuff like that to keep garbage from going into the storm drains. You're seeing a lot of stuff like that won't really have much benefit in the terms of water supply. And I've been tracking that because that was a key talking point when Measure W was on the ballot, was we need water. So I wanted to track that because in our area where there is not a lot of open space and not a lot of opportunity to collect and save that water, the water supply benefits are somewhat limited, whereas parts of LA County have tremendous upside as far as stormwater goes.
Very good. Well, thank you. I'm probably going to wrap up this portion because I know we've got another presentation coming up. Although I will say, I think Director Williams brought up a great point, and EJ, that in the future, once more of those projects have actually come to fruition in Measure W related projects, it will be interesting to see piecemeal how much water they are saving or conserving or capturing in parts of the county that does have some of an impact. I'm sure that the county will be tracking and everyone will all be figuring this one out. And one other thing I wanted to say too, before we left this with, and Dimitri too, is obviously, unfortunately, what we've heard a lot of in the press and the public and letters to the editor and others is the fact that, why aren't you guys capturing all this water? Right? I mean, a few months ago, of course, we were on the brink when it came to water supplies. And then, yes, we get these deluges. And of course, we're all getting really pummeled by the press and the public that, what are we doing? And we know, we understand, we are working on it. We can't just flip a switch. So it all goes back to the public perception. So right to the point of Measure W, it's going to be interesting how we continue to have that balance and dialogue with people. We all know the constraints, but that's hard for us to articulate to the general public. That unfortunately, some folks are saying we're not doing enough quick enough. But anyway, so with that, let's go ahead. We'll move to the next item, which is 4B as in boy. And that's an update on the Colorado River conditions. So Greg, if you'll introduce that item, please.
Absolutely. And we have Bill Hazenkamp, manager of the Colorado River Resources Management Group in Metropolitan Water District. And we're very pleased to have Bill here with us today to talk with us about the Colorado River conditions. So Bill, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
If that microphone doesn't work, you have the overhead microphones that.
Okay.
that
You stand,
will
we'll
be
pick
picked
you up.
So you see all the, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, President Houston. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation today. Following the presentation by Dimitri Polizos, trying to put together an effective presentation after his great slides would be futile. So I don't have a PowerPoint, but I do have a quote. John Wesley Powell, when he was running the Colorado River in the 1800s, was partway down the river and contemplated his journey. And he said, we have an unknown distance yet to run, an unknown river to explore. What falls there are, we know not. What rocks beset the channel, we know not. What walls ride over the river, we know not. Oh, well, we may conjecture many things. And he set about on his journey. And the last 6 years, we've been on a journey to develop a sustainable Colorado River. It's felt like that wild ride down the river. We don't know where the waterfalls are, where rocks we're going to hit. I had thought at this time we would be collaborating with the best minds in the Colorado River Basin to develop a solution. Instead, I wake up in the morning, grab my cup of coffee, sit down on my computer, look at my news feeds, and see how terrible California is, why water hogging California is not cooperating with the other 6 basin states. Day after day, gets draining. Finally, the LA Times editorial got it right with a response last week or the week before. This all started last summer when Commissioner Touton testified before Congress that 2 to 4 million acre feet of cuts are needed starting in 2023 to save the Colorado River. What she should have said was 2 to 4 million acre feet is needed if it stays dry. Worst case scenario. But instead, everyone picked it up and said, okay, we have to cut by 2 to 4 million acre feet now, or we're going to hit dead pool. So the states got together last summer and tried to come up with a plan, but we weren't able to do that. And there were really 2 reasons, 2 problems with what the commissioner had said, with all due respect to the commissioner. One was we didn't have environmental coverage for that kind of a plan. Cutting back that kind of flows through the Grand Canyon would have record low flows. We didn't have the ESA permits and the coverage for those really low flows. So we needed to figure that out. And secondly, and I think more important, we didn't believe such a big plan was needed in California. California took the position, we can come up with a 1 million acre foot plan of cuts on top of the existing shortages. We're up to 1 million acre feet. And let's watch and see how the hydrology plays out. Maybe it's enough. The other state said, no, if we're only gonna have 1,000,000 acre foot, why even bother? No deal, and we're just gonna go to our corners and fight in the media and in Congress. Nation regrouped last fall and said, instead, we're gonna have a more thoughtful process. We're gonna do a supplemental EIS to the 2007 guidelines, which control how the river's managed. We're gonna get compliance for those low flows through the Grand Canyon if they're needed. And we're gonna have new shortages for the lower basin. And they gave the basin states until January 31st to come up with a 7-state plan. They said, we've got a no action alternative, a federal alternative, which is most likely pure law of the river, and then some kind of state hybrid that they would accept. So California and the other 6 states met weekly over the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, into January. Still didn't come up with an agreement. Come up with an agreement is a fundamental different philosophy. I think it's a philosophy that is somewhat self-interest philosophy, not surprising. More junior user on the river, it's in your interest to say that the conditions are dry and getting worse. Because if things are really bad, everybody, including the senior users, have to cut now. On the other hand, if you're saying, we recognize there's climate change, but maybe that the conditions aren't that drastic right now, we can live with the priority system and have the junior priorities hit cuts first. California was saying, let's watch the hydrology, let's see what cuts we can get, and by the time January came around, we had Inflation Reduction Act funding, $4 billion from the federal government. We had proposals already submitted to reclamation for extra conservation. Let's see what we can do and watch the hydrology. The other 6 states said, no, we need huge cuts now, evaporation proposal for 1.5 million acre feet, and other cuts on top of it starting now. So we went into the January 31st, again, missed the deadline, submitted 2 proposals to reclamation. And the news has been still Colorado Basin's in trouble, Colorado Basin's in trouble. We saw Dimitri's nice graph there. In fact, the LA Times yesterday in the LA Times. California's this year's rains and snows filled the once empty reservoirs in northern and central California, but it did not change the conditions of Lake Mead and Lake Powell and the Colorado River. Well, actually, it's going to make a big difference on the Colorado. Lake Powell's storage might double this year. That's a big difference. And the states now have gotten together. And at first, the other states trying to deny. They said, well, the snow's there, but it might not make it to the reservoir. They finally changed their tune. Now we're getting ready. Now all states are back together, focusing on this wet year. What can we do with this wet year? They've acknowledged it's a wet year. Because as Dimitri said, the storms aren't over. Runoff is, I think, 130% of average and growing. So the first thing we're doing is putting water back into Flaming Gorge. They had moved last year water from Flaming Gorge to Lake Powell on an emergency basis. Upper Basin's putting it back. Lake Mead had moved water up to Lake Powell. That's going to move back. So we're kind of resetting the system, helping Lake Mead and the upper systems as if the drought wasn't so bad. And now the 6 states are saying, we probably don't need these extra cuts after all. This plan is, after all, is only a 3-year plan. So one wet year doesn't end the impacts of climate change and the need for major cuts going forward, but it does impact the 3-year plan. So we are meeting again in Phoenix next week. I think the tone now is back to collaboration, that the situation isn't so dire. Downplay it and say we have complacency. We still have a really difficult job to come up with by December 31st, a new generational plan for the Colorado River with major cuts and major changes. But I think the short term is looking a lot more certain for us. As Dimitri said, there was uncertainty. Over the last week, it looks like, now there is some certainty. Now the ICS and Lake Mead, we actually can use it as intended. And now our other agreements to put water in Lake Mead should be coming out soon at the federal government's level. So short-term things are looking better. In fact, there's even a discussion that maybe we don't even need to finalize the SCI. We don't need it anymore. The whole purpose was for low flows in the Grand Canyon to get coverage for it that we don't need anymore. So it's possible that EIS won't even be completed, and instead focus on the long term, focus on voluntary actions, kind of back what California was saying last summer. What can we do voluntarily with funds? But let's really get to work on the long-term solutions. And so some of those long-term solutions, the member agency managers, we were getting input from last Friday, from the different member agencies. What kind of funding we might be able to get to help reduce our reliance on the Colorado River. We've got the Inflation Reduction Act that all of our partners on the river have applied for. IID, PVID, Coachella, Bard Water District, the Quechon Indian Tribe, all applied for funds to increase conservation to add water to Lake Mead through 2026. That's phase one. Phase two is coming up in the next month or two. Those are for longer term savings. What the federal government has said is, so for phase one is water that is conserved and becomes system water, and it's gone. Phase two, they're open to having that water stay in Lake Mead for a period of time, not indefinitely. So maybe if we did something like a turf removal or placement program with federal funds, that water would be put in Lake Mead for a period of time, and then maybe some later date we would get credit. How long that is to be determined. What conditions you get it back to be determined. But it would help, I think, it's a little easier sell to implement conservation, knowing that the water is not lost for permanently, but just for a period of time, a long-term loan instead of a long. So those details are still being worked out in the next month or two. We will be applying for funds to help with this, but we also then are going to have to figure out long-term how we're going to reduce use in the basin by 20 to 30%. How we're going to keep agriculture productive using less water. Are there ways to incentivize switching crops from alfalfa to vegetables or other crops that use less water? Obviously, the urban areas, we need a more consistent conservation approach across the entire basin. I think Southern Nevada and Met are the leaders. I think there's room for other urban areas to step up. And then things like Pure Water, Southern California, that offers cross-state partnerships. There might be other opportunities for collaboration. So those are the things that I think we're finally going to get to start working on, and not focusing on pointing who's got to take what level of cuts, but actually solutions, because our deadline is still December of 2025. That's when all of the agreements expire. Everything needs to be new again for the next generation. So we'll see what waterfalls lie ahead. I'm a little more optimistic today, but I've had my boat sunk too many times to be naive enough to think it's going to be a smooth ride. Thank you for your time.
Very good, very good. And thank you. And it's okay. You stay in that spot while we ask some questions. It's all right. And by the way, I want to say thank you for a very animated presentation to us.
Better than plain old PowerPoint.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
He doesn't have a plain old PowerPoint, that's for sure.
That was pretty fancy too, right? It had motion and graphics in there. I see you, Director LaFave, but let me just ask a quick clarifying question, Bill. Remind me, what is the current deadline regarding with federal government? You all have something back in front of them. What was that deadline you guys are working on there?
My best not to move. There was a deadline, January 31st, that we didn't meet completely. The next milestone is the draft EIS. If they stay on the schedule to complete the SEIs, the draft will come out late April. There'll be a 45-day comment period. So sometime around Memorial Day will be comments. And the hope there is that the 7 states can come up with a consensus alternative, even though we missed the January deadline, that the Memorial Day deadline, actually we can have a 7-state plan. And then we will be reaching out to our partners to provide letters of comment in support of that 7-state plan. If we don't have a 7-state plan and California is still on its own, then we'll still be reaching out for support. But even more so, it'll be even more needed if we're still at odds to tell California's story. And I think we've done that recently. We've done a good job of telling what an amazing job. I mean, you pointed out this year we're getting beat up from all the water going to the oceans, but we've done an amazing job. Our member agencies have done an amazing job of reducing demand for water. We were 2.5 million acre feet 20 years ago. We're 1.6 this year. That's a great story while we're adding millions of people. But that's the comment period around Memorial Day. And then a final EIS with a record of decision in July is the current schedule.
Thank you. Let's see, Director LaFave, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Bill, we offered 400,000 acre feet of conservation. Is that still in the works? And if so, how are we going to meet it?
Yeah, that's in the works. We're going to meet it in a variety of ways. We're not going to meet it this year. I shouldn't say we're not going to meet it. We're starting slow. We had thought federal funding would come sooner, but ID's got a proposal for 250,000 acre feet, PVID for 90,000 acre feet, Coachella 30,000, a little bit more from the Keyshawn and Bard gets us to about 400,000. And then if Met creates any ICS, and then this is a year we might leave water in Lake Mead, that would even add more than 400. Although there's other programs, because we're not going to get a full year this year, but 24, 25, 26, we should get, assuming those contracts are finalized, the full 400 in plus each year. So yeah, that's still the plan, and there is a rough estimate of how we're going to get there.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? I have one more question for you, Bill, and I know I'm watching the time here. When you were talking about the different states, that obviously that's kind of 6 against 1, if you will, right? But how has the federal government tried, if at all, to sort of manage that or temper that, or maybe they're just staying out of it? What was going on a little bit that you could tell us?
Yeah, the federal government role in this has been a little bit more hands-off than in past years. In the drought contingency plan in 2019 and the 2007 guidelines, they were more trying to bridge differences between states to come together. This process, they tend to be more hands-off and let the states figure it out themselves. They did provide leadership with this supplemental EIS in a more thoughtful process. But still, their general MO is to provide funding and support, but let the states figure it out. And I think there are many states that are taking that position as well. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's mutual, but it's different than we've had in the past.
Well, thank you very, very much for the presentation. And I remember at one of these previous meetings, I even mentioned it to Metropolitan General Manager when I was on this thing. I mean, we are relying on you all as our representatives in this process. So thanks for your work, but also going to bat for our interests. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation. Let's go on. We've got one more item to cover. So I'm going to move to section 5, calendar section. Says item 5A, item 7-9. Consider changes to the water shortage emergency condition and the emergency water conservation program for the state water project dependent area and reaffirm the regional drought emergency for all member agencies. So with that, Greg, if you would introduce
Absolutely.
Speaker who I see is here.
We have Brad Coffey, Manager of Water Resources Management Team at Metropolitan. And Brad, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Director Houston. I actually have a plain old PowerPoint, and I know you're pressed for time. I'd be happy to just kind of walk through the main elements of our action, and that might save some time if that's important to you.
That's fine. If you'd like to expedite it, that's totally fine, and then we can ask questions on the back
Yeah.
end. Yes.
That'll be great. So I actually don't need the item posted. So as a result of what Dimitri was saying and what Bill was saying, our water supply conditions have improved. And in fact, we no longer are experiencing the severe shortage in the State Water Project dependent area. When we instituted the Emergency Water Conservation Program for 6 of our member agencies last April, that was to last until June of 2023, unless conditions improved, which would allow the board to rescind that action. And that, in fact, is what has occurred. We no longer need to access human health and safety water, and we also have sufficient water to be rebuilding the storage such that those agencies can be put on a more equal footing with the rest of our member agencies. I also want to thank West Basin and West Basin staff for some of the operational actions that they've taken and that you all have taken during this significant drought in order to preserve the State Water Project supplies. So we considered 3 or 4 different ways of moving forward. The first was to just wait until we see a final allocation. But with what the allocation was and the projected runoffs, we didn't feel we needed to do that. A second option was to lift the Emergency Water Conservation Program and lift our regional declaration of a drought emergency. And we felt that the conditions on the Colorado, though improving, still warrant agencies conserving the water that they can. Plus, the state of California still requires that all retail agencies operate under the demand response actions of level 2 of their water shortage contingency plans. What we ended up recommending, and we'll be recommending to our board next Tuesday, is to lift the Emergency Water Conservation Program for the State Water Project dependent area and to reaffirm the regional drought emergency, largely because of 2 things, mainly the conditions on the Colorado River, but also just a recognition of this weather whiplash and that we need to be prepared for potentially a dry year next year. So that'll be our recommendation, and I'd be happy to address any questions.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Any questions from anyone? I am not seeing any. So you obviously did a stellar presentation there, Brad. And it seems like the best balance, quite frankly, based on all conditions, because I think our biggest challenge, of course, is that the public just does not, go backwards when it comes to long-term issues, right? So I would say I'm very supportive of this recommendation. This seems like the right call at this time and helps ease up some concerns for those neighboring agencies. So coming out of all of this in the next handful of months, we're obviously going to have a whole new set of messaging and things, especially as we get into the summer months. So thank you for that. Is there anyone last call for questions? Oh, did I see you had a question? Mr. Town Manager Gregory.
Thank you, President Houston. And Brad, thank you for your abbreviated presentation. And just wanted to know kind of your sense of once the Emergency Conservation Program restrictions are lifted, would you anticipate that perhaps the localized restrictions will also be lifted? For example, I think in the state project dependent areas, we were down to a single day of watering irrigation per week. And so perhaps that might be, changed as a result, and what that change might look like.
The 6 agencies have all taken a slightly different tact. Some of the agencies have really seen this coming and have already begun in March to kind of rewind their actions. Others are waiting. Others have a fairly lengthy period of time to kind of reverse the codes and the city council direction. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to go as early as March. So by the late spring, early summertime, that they could land at an appropriate level. However, again, it still must be noted that the state of California is requiring that level 2 of the drought actions, and the governor has asked for state agencies to provide recommendations to him for reducing the actions in this drought emergency by the end of April. So my expectation is around the end of April, early May, we should see a lifting of many of those drought states of emergency, which is currently for all California counties.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Also, I see EJ Caldwell has a question.
Thank you, President Hughes. I just want to take the opportunity because when we talk about the neighboring agencies, I just want to remind everybody that small portions of the West Basin service area are actually served by other retailers that are in fact Metropolitan Water District member agencies, including portions of LADWP service area as well as the City of Beverly Hills. And when they initiated the State Water Project dependent area and the regulations on those member agencies, I want to say thank you to Brad Coffey and his team. And I believe, Dimitri, you were in several of those meetings as we are coordinating not just the restrictions, but also the messaging. It was a pretty, I would say, impressive effort to get us all on the same page and make sure that we are working with our communities, which include obviously the city of West Hollywood, Culver City, and then unincorporated portions of LA County. So I thought it went extremely smoothly, and I think we've seen the results as far as water use reductions. And so I want to say thank you to the Met staff.
Thank you, EJ.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, EJ, for that acknowledgement. All right. Well, with that, I don't see any other questions, and I want to say thanks. Am I hearing anybody out there or not? I want to say thanks to everybody for the presentations, for being here as well. We've gone a little over, but good dialogue. So we'll move on to item 6, which is for our director's comments or future agenda. Any of my colleagues have any comments? Future agenda item.
Just, I will not make any more comments concerning PowerPoints.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Director Gear.
No, I'm not.
Director Gray. And then, let's see, the only comment I have, I think, for a future meeting at some point, maybe if it's not next month, maybe the week after, the month after, let's hear what the thoughts are of the messaging, because we'll have had a month or two to digest this and see what the conditions are, let alone what the governor ends up doing and the state. So I think it'd be well warranted that we have some sort of conversation about, what the water community as a whole, the metropolitan, is going to be talking about. Because again, I know you already know this, but my biggest fear is everyone's going to completely reverse their behavior. And they're going to get all these mixed messages, obviously. And as Bill stated, the Colorado River system itself is greatly challenged, even if we have a lot of water coming out of the Sierras. So anyway, it's the perfect time as we get ready for the spring and the summer to make sure that we hear what Met's proposing, let alone how all the agencies, ourselves included, can participate and be on that same page. So, just I asked staff to look at that for the next month or two as one of your items. And with that, our next meeting is going to be on April 5, 2023, and we are adjourned.